Hello history buffs and welcome back to the channel. My name is Hannah and if you're new here, hi, welcome. And today we are going to be exploring all of the Tudor princesses, and this is actually the final part in this series, which is a little bit sad but also it's been going on for a while. We've done the princes, so if you want to check out the male version, check that out. And yeah, sad but also glad that it's finishing. So the people on this list are all the female descendants of Queen Elizabeth of York and King Henry VII, the first Tudor monarchs. So that means that the people on this list might not technically be princesses, but they all have royal blood and all have a claim to the English throne. One caveat is that I'm putting on this video and all of the others is the fact that I won't be including illegitimate children. So, for example, Henry Fitzroy was not included on the male list. And all of these claimants, princesses, have to be born before the death of the last Tudor monarch, Queen Elizabeth I, on the 24th of March 1603. Otherwise, we could literally be here all day. Today, we will be looking at the female descendants of Eleanor Clifford, the Countess of Cumberland. Eleanor Brandon was the second surviving daughter of Dowager Queen Mary Tudor, also the little sister of King Henry VIII, and her husband Charles Brandon. Eleanor had an elder sister, Frances, who I actually covered her and her descendants in the last video, so if you're interested, make sure you go check that out. Eleanor was born in 1519 at Westhorpe Hall in Suffolk. It would be here that she and her elder sister, Frances, would be educated and taught the valuable skills of dancing, singing, needlework, and courtly graces. According to an Elizabethan Jesuit, Eleanor and Frances were the favourite nieces of King Henry VIII, which I don't doubt when you consider the shenanigans of Henry VIII's other niece, Margaret Douglas. This remark is also supported by Henry's decision to promote his sister Mary's line, which Eleanor comes from, over his elder sister Margaret's line, which is where the line of succession should have gone. In spring 1533, Eleanor, who was now 14, was betrothed to the 16-year-old Henry Clifford, Earl of Clifford. Clifford was described as tall and slender, and he resided at the family home of Skipton Castle in Yorkshire. This union would prove to be a happy one, as Eleanor would refer to her husband as Dear Heart and signed her one surviving letter as your assured loving wife. The couple would eventually go on to have 3 children, a daughter, Margaret, and 2 sons, Henry and Charles. Unfortunately, neither of their sons would actually make it to adulthood. Unfortunately for Eleanor, 1533 would not be the joyous year that she had hoped for, as her mother, Mary Tudor, Dowager Queen of France, would die on the 25th of June. There is no real evidence to show what Mary's relationship was like with her daughters. However, I can imagine that for both Frances and Eleanor, losing their mother, as any child would losing a parent, would be devastating. I'm sure the 2 Brandon sisters, Frances and Eleanor, were absolutely devastated at losing their mother. And, I'm sure that their father, Charles, was there to support them when they most needed him.
You serious?
Wait, what? Sandra, what do you mean that he remarried on the 7th of September that year? Yeah, that actually happened. Their so-called grieving father, Charles, remarried on the 7th of September 1533, just mere months after Frances and Eleanor's mother, his wife, Mary, died. Oh, and it gets better because Catherine Willoughby, their new stepmother, was the same age as Eleanor. 1536 saw the downfall and execution of Anne Boleyn, which, although we have no correspondence on what the two Brandon daughters were doing, they would have obviously been at court and would have been surrounded by all of that, especially with their father being so close to the king. However, what we do know is that 1536 also saw the Pilgrimage of Grace. Now, I didn't know this story till I started researching this, and I'm just so sick and tired of women with fascinating stories just getting forgotten by history. So, here we go. Eleanor's husband and father-in-law refused to support the Pilgrimage of Grace. Now, remember, they are up in Yorkshire. They fortified Skipton Castle in case of an attack from the rebels. Henry Clifford travelled to Carlisle to help defend the city from rebels, while Eleanor departed for Bolton Abbey to seek sanctuary. Their home, Skipton Castle, was surrounded on the 22nd of October, and Bolton Abbey fell soon after. The rebels seized the Countess, Eleanor, her son, and her sister-in-laws. The rebels then threatened her father-in-law, who was also called Henry Clifford, and they said that if he did not surrender Skipton Castle, then the Countess would be violated to his discomfort. Luckily, Eleanor was spared from such a horrible ordeal, as Christopher Aske, who was the brother of the rebellion's leader, Robert Aske, managed to negotiate a deal with the elder Henry Clifford. The rebels abandoned their siege on Skipton Castle, Eleanor left Bolton Abbey, and they all returned home, and Eleanor was safe. That is such a horrendous thing to go through, and yet I don't feel like anybody ever talks about Eleanor's ordeal. So when I get around to be doing her own biography, trust me, we'll be going further into detail on that. Eleanor Clifford, Countess of Cumberland, died on the 27th of September, 1547. Just months into the reign of King Edward VI. She was 28, that's my age. Nicola Tallis has suggested that Eleanor may have died from pancreatic cancer. In a letter to her husband, she hinted at red water and pains in my side. She was buried at the Holy Trinity Church in Skipton, where her remains were discovered in the 17th century, and she was thought to have been very tall and large-boned. Margaret Stanley, Countess of Derby. Now, Margaret was the daughter of Henry Clifford and Eleanor Brandon, and she was born in 1540, probably at Skipton Castle in North Yorkshire. Margaret was one of 3 children, Margaret, Henry and Charles. Both of her brothers died, unfortunately, in infancy. Margaret's historical importance lies in her claim to the English throne. Upon the death of her mother on the 27th of September 1547, 8 months after Henry VIII's death, Margaret became 7th in line to the throne. Little is known about Margaret's childhood. She was probably raised at the family seat at Skipton Castle. Her father was a member of the respected Northern Catholic Clifford family, try saying that 3 times fast, and it's unknown if Margaret's mother Eleanor supported the Cliffords' Catholic views, although, mouthful, it is interesting that Margaret's aunt and Eleanor's older sister Frances married an extreme Protestant. So that's worth bearing in mind. In 1552, when she was just 12 years old, Margaret was proposed as a bride to Guildford Dudley, a younger son of the Duke of Northumberland, with the support of Edward VI. But Henry Clifford was not in favour of the proposed match. David Loades has suggested that the fact that he, Northumberland, had preferred the Cliffords to the Greys demonstrates that his plans were unconnected with the succession issue. Instead, Guildford married Margaret's cousin, Lady Jane Grey. I've got to say, I think I disagree with David Loades on this one. Yeah, both of them have a claim to the English throne. At this point, Edward is heir, okay? He's only got about another year left. And actually, if the line of succession is going to go through Mary Tudor, like Edward wanted, and like Henry VIII had wanted after obviously Henry's children, then Jane's going to be further up the pecking order than what Eleanor is anyway. And also both of the potential brides were descendants of King Henry VIII. It's not like Eleanor was a random person. Anyway, we're not here to talk about my thoughts on the Duke of Northumberland. The following year, the Imperial Ambassador reported that Margaret would marry Andrew Dudley, the younger brother of the Duke of Northumberland. He was about 33 years older than her, which was not unusual in the 16th century. And it seems like Andrew was going to go through with this marriage. He had reserved items from the wardrobe at Westminster, including jewels, silver and gilt cups, a hairbrush, velvet dog collars and pictures. However, the mooted Dudley-Clifford wedding did not take place, and Andrew was imprisoned in the Tower of London alongside his brother and nephews for their involvement in the attempt to install Lady Jane Grey as Queen. Andrew's brother, the Duke of Northumberland, was executed in August 1553, but Andrew was pardoned and he was released 2 years later in 1555. In February 1555, the 15-year-old Margaret married Henry Stanley, Earl of Derby, at the Chapel Royal at Whitehall Palace. He was 9 years her senior and was related by blood to the Howards. He had attended Edward VI's coronation and served as Gentleman of the Privy Chamber. Unlike Margaret's father, Stanley was committed to the Protestant faith as a result of his upbringing at Edward VI's court. The couple do not appear to have enjoyed a happy marriage, and it looks like that they even eventually separated. Despite this, they did have 4 children in the course of their marriage: Edward, Ferdinando, William and Francis. Edward and Francis unfortunately both died young. Ferdinando and William were successively both the Earls of Derby. But not at the same time, it was Ferdinando then William. Okay. A historical tradition claims that Margaret Clifford had aspirations towards the English throne. In 1568, her cousin Catherine Grey died in disgrace at Cockfield Hall, and another cousin, Mary Grey, died in London in 1578, both of whom were the younger sisters of Lady Jane Grey. As a result, by 1579, Margaret was heir to the throne, according to the terms of Henry VIII's last will and testament, and the Acts of Succession. The claim was ignored by supporters of the imprisoned Mary Queen of Scots, who believed that the Stuart line, deriving from Henry VIII's elder sister Margaret, was superior to the Suffolk line, which derived from his younger sister Mary. In 1579, Margaret was accused of employing a magician, Dr. Randall, to cast spells that would harm her cousin, Queen Elizabeth. Randall was hanged and Margaret was placed under house arrest. Unlike her husband, Margaret was suspected of harbouring Catholic sympathies, which was a dangerous position to take in the late 1570s. Margaret wrote to the Queen complaining that she was in a black dungeon of sorrow and despair, overwhelmed with heaviness through the loss of your Majesty's favour and gracious countenance. Unfortunately for Margaret, she was never restored to favour, and she died on the 28th of September 1596 at the age of 56. Anne Stanley, Countess of Castlehaven, was born on the 16th of July 1581. Anne Stanley was the eldest child and daughter of Alice Spencer and Ferdinando Stanley, Earl of Derby. Her father, Ferdinando, was the son of our previous princess, Margaret Stanley, Countess of Derby. Anne had 2 younger sisters, Frances and Elizabeth. Her father died on the 16th of April 1594. Her mother, Alice, remarried 6 years later to Thomas Egerton. 1601 was the year of marriages for the Stanley women. Anne's sister Elizabeth wed Henry Hastings, Earl of Huntingdon, on the 15th of January, and later that year, her other sister Frances married their step-brother John Egerton, the son of Thomas. Now, personally, I find it a bit odd that Anne wasn't found a marriage first, as it was normally the sort of custom that the eldest daughter was found a match first, before the younger siblings. However, it may have been down to societal changes that Anne had not found a husband first. After all, we are edging closer out of the Tudor period and into the Stuarts. Or is it the fact that as the eldest, they were holding off for Anne and hoping that she could get a grander match? In the same year that the youngest Stanley sisters were getting hitched, discussions were being held in the court of Queen Elizabeth I for a proposed marriage between the Queen's cousin Anne Stanley and the Prince of Muscovy. In the autumn of that year, Queen Elizabeth I sent a letter to the Emperor of Muscovy which explained, it's pronounced Muscovy, right? Muscovy, yeah, okay, cool. Nobody come at me, I did that right. Here we did command our ambassador to speak, we being persuaded that there might have been a convenient marriage between the prince, your son, and one of the daughters and heir of our cousin, the Earl of Derby, being of our blood royal and of greater possessions than any subject within our realm, but having now to our great grief understood upon inquiry that your son is not above 13 years of age, which is almost 5 years under that lady's age. This letter is evidence of Elizabeth using her relatives as bargaining chips in the game of European politics, much like she would have done to the younger Grey sisters had they not gone off and secretly got married on their own. This also helped to steer away from the glaringly obvious fact that Elizabeth was now too old to provide an heir by herself. However, the failure of this royal match meant that Alice Stanley had to now secure another suitable husband for her eldest and richest daughter and co-heiress. So yeah, Anne Stanley was like the person you wanted to marry. She had everything. She was the it girl. Alice would eventually find a match for her daughter Anne, and the man would be Grey Bridges, Lord Chandos. The two would wed sometime before 1607. Grey had the nickname of King of the Cotswolds, making Anne his Queen of the Cotswolds, and the marriage seemed to be happy. The couple had 6 children, but Grey unexpectedly died while abroad in Europe on the 10th of August 1621. Anne would remain a widow until 1624, when she wed the Earl of Castlehaven on the 22nd of July 1624 at the age of 44. In 1630, Anne Stanley's stepson and son-in-law, James, accused his father of misusing his inheritance by providing money to his preferred individuals in return for sexual favours. Amidst the inquiries, Anne revealed to the investigators that her husband had aided his footman in assaulting her, and she disclosed that he regularly engaged in sexual acts with his male favourites. Consequently, the Earl faced trial for charges of rape and sodomy, alongside 2 servants, and was ultimately convicted. Again, another woman from history who has an amazing story to tell, and yet nobody tells it. Ugh! Apart from me, which is why I'm here. And actually, I do already have a video covering the Queen of the Cotswolds, Anne Stanley, so if you want to learn more about the court case and everything and her life, then please go check that out. On the 25th of April 1631, the Earl of Castlehaven's trial took place, during which Anne's testimony was read on her behalf. This was done to try and save her the embarrassment of addressing the court and to try and preserve her dignity. I mean, after all, she was of royal blood, hence why she's on this list. Despite making the charges, the Countess herself did not personally attend the Earl's trial. The first part of the Countess's testimony recounted the Earl's desire to watch her sleep with other men. She then described the night that the Earl and Giles Broadway raped her. That one night, being abed with her at Fonthill, he called for his man, Broadway, and commanded him to lie at his bed's feet, and about midnight, she being asleep, called him to light a pipe of tobacco. Broadway rose in his shirt, and my lord pulled him onto the bed to him and her, and made him lie next to her. Once Broadway climbed into her bed. Broadway lay with her, and knew her carnally, while she made resistance, and the lord held both her hands and one of her legs the while. After the assault, as soon as she was free, she would have killed herself with a knife, but that Broadway forcibly took the knife from her and broke it, and before that act of Broadway, she had never done it. After hearing both sides, the jurors were unanimous. The Earl of Castlehaven was found guilty. The jurors believed that the Earl was driven by lust, one of the 7 deadly sins. He was to be hanged. The Countess of Castlehaven's testimony mentions nothing about her husband's sexual relationships with other men. She, therefore, did not actually play an extensive role in the Earl's guilty verdict on this charge, nor did she testify against Lawrence Fitzpatrick at his joint trial with Giles Broadway. The Earl's family were furious, and they flooded King Charles I with petitions, in one where they pray him, the king, to examine those persons upon whose testimonies the Earl has been adjudged to die. However, on the 7th of May 1631, King Charles I decreed that the verdict would be upheld. However, as the Earl of Castlehaven had noble ancestry, he allowed the Earl the more merciful death of beheading. The Earl of Castlehaven was beheaded on the 14th of May 1631. After the execution, Anne, now the Dowager Countess of Castlehaven, spent most of her days removed from the public life, only appearing briefly in person at the joint trial of Giles Broadway and Lawrence Fitzpatrick. Although the verdict had been made before the trial, the Earl had already been executed, so by the time it was their turn, it was almost certain that they would be executed. And they were, on the 6th of July 1631. Both men were hanged. On the scaffold, Broadway accused Anne of murdering her own child and being the wickedest woman in the world. Anne and her children relocated to Harefield House, where the Countess of Derby played a pivotal role in their lives. While accepting her daughter and granddaughter into her home, the Countess of Derby expected them to lead quiet, secluded and modest lives. Despite the disgrace of the Castlehaven trial, she ensured her other Bridges grandchildren maintained respectable and ordinary lives. During Anne's tumultuous second marriage and the subsequent breakdown of her reputation and family, she didn't face these challenges alone. Her mother, Alice Spencer, Countess of Derby, played a significant role in both the trial and the King's actions in the months following. The Dowager Countess of Derby had never endorsed her eldest daughter's choice of a second husband. However, when Anne's household started unravelling, Alice did not turn her back on her. Anne Stanley, the Queen of the Cotswolds and Dowager Countess of Castlehaven, died at the age of 67 in October 1647. Unfortunately for the Countess of Castlehaven, upon her passing, discussions surrounding her virtue and honour were unlikely. Anne seemingly continued to reside at Haydon House until her demise, after which her body was transported to Harefield. Like I said earlier, I do have a video on Anne Stanley. I go a lot further into depth, so if you do want a deeper dive into her life and the Castlehaven trial, then please make sure you go and check that out. Frances Stanley was the second surviving daughter of Alice Spencer and Ferdinando, Earl of Derby, and she was the younger sister of Anne Stanley, Countess of Castlehaven. Frances was born on the 1st of May 1583. She was joined by a younger sister, Elizabeth, in 1587. Frances lost her father, Ferdinando, at the age of 12, and her mother remarried 6 years later to Thomas Egerton in 1600. Frances and her sister Elizabeth would both wed in 1601. Elizabeth wed Henry Hastings, Earl of Huntingdon, while Frances wed John Egerton, the son of her stepfather. So, yeah, she married her stepbrother. There was a precedent for marrying step-siblings. Granted, it wasn't that common, but equally it's not as bad as what Henry VIII was throwing about when he seriously considered marrying his daughter, Mary, to his illegitimate son, so her half-brother, Henry Fitzroy. Did I mention they were half-siblings, not step? Half. They shared a parent. The marriage between John and Frances seemed fairly successful, and he was made Earl of Bridgewater in 1617. John and Frances were also known for supporting poetry and theatre. Frances, a knowledgeable woman, established her own library. Inventories from her library reveal books on various subjects, including history, contemporary literature, and extensive assortment of scriptures, theologies, and psalms. Frances was esteemed by her peers for her deep piety and expertise in religious scripture, evident in the manuscripts that she collected. John frequently stayed at Ludlow Castle, although his family did divide their time between Bridgewater House in London and the grand estate of Ashridge in Buckinghamshire. The Countess of Bridgewater displayed a preference for Ashridge over Ludlow, as it kept her closer to her mother and to London. It was here at Ashridge that she established her renowned library. Their children regularly moved between Ashridge and Harefield. John and Frances were blessed with 15 children, of which only 1 son and 10 daughters survived to adulthood. Consequently, childbirth dominated much of Frances' life. Despite this, they successfully arranged 8 marriages for their daughters, securing an advantageous match for their sole surviving son. On the 25th of April 1631, the Stanley family were caught up in the trial of the Earl of Castlehaven, the husband of Frances' sister, Anne Stanley. The Earl was found guilty and eventually executed, but Anne's reputation suffered as a result. And it wasn't just Anne who was affected by the fallout of the trial. Frances' husband, now the Earl of Bridgewater, was appointed President of the Marches of Wales on the 8th of July 1631. However, due to his sister-in-law's scandal, he didn't officially take office until 3 years later. That's how long it took for the whole thing to blow over. Frances' younger sister, Elizabeth, had been staying at the Countess of Bridgewater's home, and on the 20th of January 1634, Elizabeth Stanley died of uterine cancer at her sister Frances' home. On the 11th of March 1636, Frances Stanley, the Countess of Bridgewater, passed away at the age of 52. Much less is documented about the circumstances surrounding Frances' demise compared to her younger sister. Her funeral sermon hints at an illness, although, come here, yeah, Keith Thomas thinks she might have been a victim of witchcraft.
Coincidence? I think not!
Frances' remains were conveyed to the Church of St. Peter and St. Paul in Little Gadsden. This modest stone chapel lies just a short distance from Ashbridge, the primary country residence of the Egertons. Her funeral took place there, and she was laid to rest in a simple memorial. Since her burial, the church has become the main burial ground for the descendants of the Egerton family. Like her younger sister, Frances apparently did not leave a will. Elizabeth Stanley was the third and youngest daughter of Alice Spencer and Ferdinand Stanley, the Earl of Derby. She was born in 1587. Elizabeth lost her father Ferdinando at the age of 7 in 1594, and her mother, Alice, remarried 6 years later to Thomas Egerton in 1600. Elizabeth herself would marry Henry Hastings, Earl of Huntingdon, on the 15th of January 1601. Henry did not care for courtly life. Instead, it would be Elizabeth who would become involved in the political affairs and would frequently travel to London on business to speak on her husband's behalf in order to win favour with the Privy Council and the King. In addition to her eloquent and captivating speaking abilities, she dedicated a significant portion of her life to studying scripture and living devoutly. Her legacy includes numerous manuscripts containing sermons and reflections, showcasing not only her profound religious contemplations, but also her adherence to the moderate Calvinism. Elizabeth Stanley and Henry Hastings had 4 children together, the first being born in 1605, only a few years after they were married. Spring 1631 saw the Earl of Castlehaven trial, Elizabeth's brother-in-law as he was, and her sister Anne's second husband. The Earl of Castlehaven was found guilty and he was beheaded on the 14th of May 1631. On the 7th of July 1632, Elizabeth wrote to her husband while she was in London on business. It is obvious from her letter that she knew that her health was declining. "I am not very well. Since Thursday in the night, I have had much pain in my back and foot. My back is well, and all my pain is now in my feet. Sir John Stanhope and Dr. Turner was with me this morning, and tomorrow intends to give me a purge. It is a feverish humour, and wind comes from my spleen, and I hope in God within a few days I shall be well." 5 days later she wrote to her loving Henry again. "Sir Theodore Magern had let me bleed at the instant when the porter came. This had settled the wind in my bowels, spleen, and this day had given me a purge. I am a little weak, having eaten almost nothing till this night since Thursday. I shall make a good journey for you." Even amidst her physical pain, and possibly at the expense of her health, the Countess of Huntingdon remained focused on her mission to London. Throughout her last years, she persistently journeyed between Leicester and London, unwavering in her commitment to enhance her family's wealth and her husband's standing. She powered on like a trooper, but all of the travelling did unfortunately take a toll on her already poor health, and Elizabeth Stanley, Countess of Huntingdon, died on the 20th of January 1634 of uterine cancer. She died at Whitefriars at the home of her sister Frances. It is likely that she had been living with her sister so that she had somebody to look after her. Peter Chamberlain, Doctor of Physics, issued a certificate testifying as to the cause of her death, which read, "The causes of her death was the infection of the mother or place of conception, and that from the time of her being at Inglefield, I never perceived anything to come from those parts of anything offensive smell. Nor did her honour complain of pain, save in bloody flux or looseness, and upon the coming forth of the right intestine, from which being freed, she received her last hours with as much ease as slumber to a quiet mind and laboured body." Her funeral was on the 9th of February 1634, and unfortunately her grave marker no longer exists. The body of the Countess of Huntingdon, being laid into a chariot adorned with echelons and her ladyship's coronet belonging to her estate, and a black velvet cushion carried before her by 2 officers of arms in their coats, deputed by Mr. Garter, Principal of King of Arms, to attend the proceeding, many of the chief nobility and persons of quality accompanying her, was conveyed towards Ashby de la Zouche. The entire community was heartsick at the Countess's death. The Chamberlain of Leicester paid 10 shillings to the herald for the safe return of the Countess's body. She had been a patron to the arts and an author in her own right, and, by the sounds of it, a beloved member of her community. Thank you so much for watching this final instalment on the Tudor Princesses. If this is your first video in the series, what are you doing? This is the last one. Go back and watch the other ones. So please do make sure you go watch it from the beginning. And if you liked this series, I do have a series on their male counterparts, so please go check that out as well. And if you did like this video, why not leave a like or subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you really do want to support my channel, then you can always leave a super thanks. But until the next one, guys, have a wonderful day. Bye.